I try to focus on the positive with books because I generally read for enjoyment, and my goals for this channel are mostly to help connect people with books that they're gonna love. But today I'm taking a break from that noble goal to discuss the opposite. I'm pretty good at choosing books I know I'm going to like. I know what I like to read, so it's very rare that I pick up a book that I can't get myself to at least finish, let alone would rate below a 3-star. But part of knowing how to choose books I like involves knowing what I don't like, and these are books that definitely don't appeal to me. Some of them because I just find them generally annoying or disinteresting, others because their content I find disgusting. I'm going to take a moment to put a content warning for some of the topics I will be discussing. Let's get into it. Midnight Sun by Stephanie Myers. When Midnight Sun was announced to be released, I was confused because I thought this book came out like 10 years ago. Apparently it was leaked back then, and then Myers wasn't going to bother publishing it, but for some reason decided 2020 was the year. For those of you who don't know, Midnight Sun is Twilight but told from Edward's POV. Since finishing the Twilight saga in 2011, Myers has released a handful of other books in the Twilight universe, starting with The Short Second Life of Bree Tanner. This was a novella focusing on a minor character we meet briefly in Breaking Dawn. I didn't read it, but I kind of respect the concept. Unfortunately, Bree Tanner's appearance in Breaking Dawn was exceptionally short. Not exactly long enough for me to be too curious about her, but I was disappointed when she was quickly killed off. After that came Life and Death, a Twilight retelling with Edward, Bella, and a handful of other main characters written to be the opposite gender. Another book I haven't read, so maybe I'm not one to judge, but I'm not entirely convinced that this book didn't require much more effort than control search and replacing names and pronouns. I think the plot is pretty much the same, with one exception that at the end of the book, Beau, or Bella, becomes a vampire, ending the series with the first book. Midnight Sun requires a little more effort than that, but this is the third time Stephanie Meyer is selling this story. I don't know, the original book wasn't good and definitely not worth 2 more iterations. And especially because she chose Edward's POV. Like, the one thing I can say about Twilight is that the secondary and tertiary characters in the series are way more interesting than our main characters, and Myers could have really done something there if she wanted to revisit this creative universe and flesh it out a bit more. Like, I might actually read some prequels about characters like Alice, who had an exceptionally sad backstory before she was taken in by the Cullens, or even Carlisle. This character, and it jars me every time to remember, was 23 when he was turned into a vampire. And he's the patriarch of the Cullens. Like, it's just so weird in modern times to think of him as a father figure, especially to a bunch of 17 to 19-year-olds. Like, this is a friend group, not a family. But I digress. While we have a general idea of how each family member was turned into a vampire and welcomed into the family, it's something I'd read about in greater detail, particularly through Carlisle's perspective, since he played an active role in forming their family. But even if Myers didn't want to go back in history and write something pre-Twilight, I can still think of a handful of POVs that would be more interesting, like maybe the story from a werewolf's perspective. Leah, the only female werewolf in the series, for example, or even a human's perspective, like Charlie, who not only incredibly involved in the main plot, but kind of only knows what's going on. Or Jessica. Like, I think it'd be funny to see the book from her POV. I wonder what sort of weird gossip would happen at school while no one really knows what's going on with the Cullens and with Bella. And also maybe sometimes Jessica is too self-absorbed to really notice things. But nope, we're stuck with Edward, providing essentially the same exact story we get with Twilight. I respect a shtick, but there's really no other reason for these fanfic-esque publications besides that Myers wanted to make a little more money off of this idea while putting very little effort into it. And from what I've heard from those who have read this book, hearing Edward's thoughts on his own already creepy actions just make it even creepier. Overall, I don't have interest in this book. I'd rather spend my time and money on a more original idea. Ready Player 2 by Ernest Cline. You may be wondering why Ready Player 2 when you haven't even read Ready Player 1. Well, I think there's a minuscule possibility that I might actually read the first one. It's far from the top of my list of priorities, and I probably would get it from the library rather than spending money on it. But yeah, I think there's a chance I might read the first one someday. But the sequel. My thoughts on this are mostly based off of what I've heard in the video by Amanda the Jedi, in which she discusses the book in full detail, spoilers included. It's not a secret that I like video games, and this series is by a gamer for gamers, as well as science fiction. So on paper, this sounds like something I would like. However, what I grasped from the sequel, Wade has had no character development from the first, and continues to resist any sort of character development in the second. The book takes place in the dystopian future where many aspects of life are lived through virtual reality called the Oasis, in order to escape the harsh condition of reality. The first book ends with Wade inheriting the Oasis and leaves the readers with the hope that the real world might recover. But the second book supposedly undoes any glimpse of hope. Wade discovers an unreleased bit of technology that would allow users to become fully immersed in virtual reality, experiencing it as if the experiences were their own. However, this tech comes with the caution that it could potentially cause brain damage, as well as, in order to use it, a person's brain becomes uploaded to the device. The device stores all of the memories and experiences of the person, which seems really creepy and dystopian in its own, but the book doesn't play it at that angle. Wade immediately decides to release the technology, just like not even considering the dangers or consequences at all. His girlfriend from the first book, Samantha, breaks up with him over this decision. Apparently she's like the one sane character in this book, because she's like, we should be doing something to help make reality better, and like, I'm assuming Wade got some wealth from winning in the first book, or at least he has power and influence to be able to make some sort of change for good. But nonetheless, that's not what this book's about. And of course, there's some creepy stalking that's played off as romantic as he stalks Samantha through his newfound tech, and later begins stalking a YouTube fangirl of his once he discovers she's actually into him. And at this point in the story, he uncovers that she is actually transgender, which usually I'm pretty thrilled to see LGBT characters included, but the way this plot was incorporated, as in he discovered this about her while doing a background check on her, rather than her actually coming out to him, it takes away her autonomy over a very personal bit of information. Wade claims that he thinks of her as no different after this discovery, and that kind of holds true. He apparently is too proud to accept any help from her, assumingly because she's a woman, yet he has no issue with accepting help from one of his male friends. So like, great, he's not transphobic. He hates all women equally. But I don't even know why this romance plot was included except to earn some brownie points for diversity, because I don't even think they end up getting together. Samantha ends up forgiving him and apologizing to him, even though the entire plot of the book ended up being the exact thing she warns him would happen, happening, and having to fix that. It doesn't make any sense at all. I think both books could have been fun or meaningful, or even both based on the concept. But the impression I am left with is it's just a man-nerd power fantasy, chock full of 80 references, and all women characters are mainly used as accessories to the storyline. I appreciate a dystopian that isn't about undoing the corruption of its world, because that is a huge goal to undertake, but Wade had the resources at his fingertips to actually make a difference, and instead he made reckless decisions which made things worse, and somehow in the end he is played off as the hero and can do no wrong. He kind of makes me think of Elon Musk, to be honest. That's probably why I don't want to read this book. Call Me By Your Name by Andre Asaman. I know little else about this book besides that it is a romance between a 17-year-old boy and a 24-year-old man. And that's enough to make me not want to read it. Like, I'm 25 right now, and the youngest I probably date is 21. Like, I wouldn't even date an 18-year-old, even though they are technically an adult, because teenagers are just kids to me. And they should be. To put it in perspective, that is a high school dating a bachelor degree graduate. They're in vastly different places in life. It's a weird power imbalance. Plus, why couldn't he have been at least 18? What difference would 1 year added to his age have made? It just feels ill with intent, associating homosexuality with pedophilia, and further perpetrating the idea that LGBT people are just perverted individuals. And for readers who are LGBT, especially minors, it normalizes the idea of having romantic and sexual relationships with grown-ups, leaving them vulnerable to unhealthy relationships in the future. Also, there's already pedophiles thinking that they belong in the LGBT community because of their attraction to children. Like, that's not a sexuality, that's just a nasty fetish. I understand settling for whatever LGBT representation you can get your hands on, and there's definitely been media I've liked because it was all I can find on the topic, even if it was poorly executed or even problematic at times. But fortunately, there are more and more better LGBT books coming out each year, particularly by LGBT authors. So I kind of don't understand the popularity of this one. It's by Stephen King. I think this one is gonna get me some hate. If you read this book rather than only seen the movie, you probably know what scene caused me to put this book on my list. I'm just gonna read this part directly from Wiki Synopsis. The losers get lost in the sewers until Beverly has sex with each of the boys to bring unity back to the group. They're 11 years old at this point in the book, and they have an orgy. Not only is 11-year-old child orgy a gross concept, it absolutely doesn't make sense to me. Like, there was no need for King to have taken that scene there. In film adaptations, I think she just kisses each of the boys, which is still but compared to the original and improvements, for one, I don't understand how that fixes the situation. I understand there was tension within the group and they were starting to fall apart. But when I had issues with my friends growing up, sex wasn't the way I solved them. I don't even use sex to fix friendships as an adult. I can't imagine this being something an actual 11-year-old would do, not to mention the fact that it is only her having sex with each of the boys. It really boils her character down to nothing more than just her body, which is a messed up thing to do with an adult female character, let alone a literal child. From what I hear about Stephen King, he tends to abuse his female characters, and I don't need to read that. So while I mention it specifically, also just anything by Stephen King is on my anti-TBR, I just have no interest in reading his work. 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. This one is so notorious, I think it goes without explanation. It is a Twilight erotic fanfiction with the character names altered, minus vampires and werewolves, and it became published. I watched a movie for date night once because I thought it would be entertainingly bad. Turned out it was just bad. I can't even poke fun at it. It took strength to get through this movie because it was just boring with horrific plot. The story markets itself as a BDSM, and I knew going into it the story fails to accurately portray BDSM. What I got from the movie is Christian Grey was groomed by an older woman as a teenager, and this started his interest in BDSM. When he meets Anastasia, he wants her to sign a literal contract saying that he can do whatever he wants to her. Whereas Anastasia is this exceptionally naive virgin who doesn't even own a computer. So reasonably she's weirded out about this. She's never heard of it before, let alone has any experience dating or with sex. It's a pretty extreme jump for her for a first relationship, so reasonably she's hesitant, but she still kind of likes Christian anyway. So she wants a romantic relationship with him, he wants a strictly sexual relationship with her. Clearly they want different things. If Anastasia was my friend, I'd be like, sis, it's time to move on. Clearly, he doesn't want what you want, and don't stick around hoping he's gonna change his mind. And he's literally trying to control her life. Like, he gets really pissed at her when she drinks alcohol, and there's some clause about how she must maintain a certain weight, as well as lists what food she's allowed to eat versus what she isn't. These are all red flags. Especially because he gets mad at her. He gets mad at her when she makes her own choices, and she still hasn't signed this contract yet. Like, there's no reason why he should feel like he owns her. He's only acting this way because he likes her. And that's not romantic. That's also not BDSM. That's just abuse. At one point, she agrees to let him spank her, which she immediately starts crying and gets visibly upset about. Clearly, she isn't into it. Like, that is just skimming the surface of the sadistic acts Christian wants to do with her, and she didn't like it, so obviously this isn't gonna work out. I was left with the impression that this man doesn't need a girlfriend, he needs therapy. His interest in BDSM is a poorly disguised excuse to do terrible things he wants to do, and the story sets it up that Anastasia is supposed to fix him. And that is supposed to be romantic? No thank you. Not gonna watch the rest of the movies in this series, and certainly not gonna try reading them either, because from what I've heard, the rating is really poor as well. I don't want this to come off as I'm picking on anyone who has read these books or even enjoyed them. That's great if you did. Some of these I'm just not personally interested in. The other, more problematic ones, I don't personally think it'd be worthwhile for me to subject myself to those books, especially when they contain subjects I only want to read when they are being handled in a certain way that those books definitely do not. It really just boils down to knowing what sort of books I want to read and knowing what I don't, and everyone's taste is different.